Hi there, I'm here today live with this Q&A answering a question about a request actually on tips for anticipating and responding to conservation-centric planners. So this is actually a really tough question, a tough thing to give tips on. So we'll dive into this. It's an interesting one. I'm Jane. I'm founding director of iArchitect, and I specialise in helping homeowners turn their period property with potential into comfortable, modern homes that suit their lifestyle that is modern and current, whilst maintaining that period character and using eco-design techniques to help save the planet. So let's get into this question. Tips on anticipating and responding to conservation-centric planners. Right, so first of all, you need to find out who your planner is, and that's not necessarily very straightforward. The first thing to do would be to call your local authority planning department and ask who it would be. The thing is that the different local authority planning departments are structured in slightly different ways, but they're usually teams, and teams cover a certain area, and so it may be a team of people rather than an individual planner that you would be referred to. The difficulty is that the planning departments are incredibly under-resourced, so they just don't, local authorities don't have a lot of money these days, and they're not able to employ as many planners as is really needed. So planners working in local authorities, as far as I can tell, they're really struggling to keep up with their workload. So it can be really, really difficult to get hold of a planner, and then if you do get hold of a planner, being able to actually have a meaningful conversation and discuss things with them can be quite difficult to do. But that's the first thing to do, is find out who your planner is. Another way to do that, if calling the local authority planning department doesn't work, is you can look at recent planning applications that have been done in your area, very close to you, within the same couple of streets, and find out who the case officer was for those planning applications. You can find that information online by searching for planning applications, and use an address. Use your address as a starting point, or a postcode. If you use your postcode, so it gives your local area, that's a good way of finding out who perhaps one or two of the current case officers are who are dealing with projects near you. So once you've found out who your planner is, then there's a whole other level to go through. So let me know in the comments below if you have had any conversations with your local planners, especially any conservation area planners, and share your experiences of dealing with planning departments. I'd be really interested to hear what you've got to say about that. So once you found out who your planner is, you need to find out what they're like. And there are a few different ways, again, of getting to do that. The best way is to be able to have a chat with them, or at least some email correspondence. But emails are not really a very personable way to discuss things with somebody, so it's quite difficult to really get a good understanding of what person's really like through email. So the best way is to meet them face to face, but that's quite difficult. As I said before, planners are really under-resourced. They don't have a lot of spare time to deal with inquiries, pre-application inquiries. So the chances of getting to meet a planner is going to be quite low. But it might be possible for you to have a chat with a planner. you do really need to speak with the planner who is most likely to be the case officer for your project, because planning legislation is so complicated and it's so down to an individual's interpretation of that legislation that one planning officer may approve a project and another planning officer may not approve that exact same project. They've just interpreted the legislation differently. So you really want to get pre-application advice from the case officer who is most likely to be dealing with your project. That might be quite difficult to figure out, but if it's possible to figure it out, that's what you want. So other ways to find out what your planner is like would be to read any of their reports that they've written in relation to other approved or not approved planning applications that they've dealt with locally. So you could read their reports and sort of get some idea of the way that they would interpret legislation typically. If you want to go to the sort of extremes, then you could go and hang out at the public planning committees, and you can attend those, and a lot of case officers will also attend those, so you could potentially get to know them face to face that way. That would take a lot of time and effort to do that, but that's possibly an option. It depends on you and your project, how much time you've got, how important it is to you, and whether that's something that you'd be prepared to do. Another thing you could do is contact local planning consultants and see if they're prepared to have a chat with you initially and get some insight from them, because they will have huge amounts of experience of dealing with the local planning authority, and they are very likely to know each of the case officers who are dealing with your area very well. And they may even have worked with them as colleagues in the past. They may have worked. Most planning consultants have worked in a local authority at some point, so they're likely to know these planning officers better than anybody. So you could go that route. What you want to find out is what kind of personality does your case officer have, and in particular, how big is their ego? How much is the power and control? It's a very powerful position to be in, to be a planning officer, because you have the capacity to say yes or no to people's dreams, to these planning applications. That's a lot of planning, a lot of power and a lot of control that a case officer has. And so for some, and I think this is the minority, but there are some planning officers whose ego is incredibly big, and that is a real driving force, and can be quite difficult to deal with that kind of planning officer. They do exist, and there are ways to deal with them, but they are probably the most difficult ones to deal with. I'd say the vast majority of planning officers really are looking to have got some quite high ideals about quality places. That's what they're looking to do. They're looking to make sure that the place that they are responsible for maintains a certain level of quality in terms of how it looks, how people feel and enjoy that space. That's really, and those are the sorts of planners, if they're less of an ego and they've got more of an ideal, those are the sort of planners who I prefer to deal with. You can have an interesting conversation with them, perhaps delve into the sort of philosophical natures of your local authority, your local place and sense of place. And there's more possibility of having a conversation and exploring options and finding a positive result that's going to suit everybody with that kind of a planner. But there's certainly sort of two extremes of planners. And then one really big thing that I would say a lot of planners are really trying to avoid, and that is negativity. I mean, who wants negativity in their life, right? I certainly don't, and most people don't. And negativity for planners comes in the form of objections. So you want to make sure that you are not doing, or you're not doing something that other people are going to object, or that you can do things to anticipate potential objections and prevent them from happening. So we'll go into that in a little bit, but that's one thing that planning officers, I expect, a lot of them, they really hate that sort of negativity. They don't want to be receiving messages from other local neighbours and residents and other interested parties who are saying, no, we don't want to have this, and because that really ultimately it gives them a lot more work, but you know, they would prefer not to have that negativity to deal with. So that's something to take into consideration. So let me know below if you have had a planning application that has received tons of objections and how you dealt with it. That would be really interesting to hear about. And let us know what you did to counteract that, or if you managed to get planning permission or not. So how to pander to ego. So what I think, if you're not being able to find out what your planner is or who your planner is, then you kind of have to make some basic assumptions, and you kind of have to assume the worst. So the worst case scenario really is that you're dealing with the kind of planner who has a huge ego and loves to have power and control, and in that case you need to pander to that ego. So there are a few different things that you can do. So you can appeal for them for their help, so that they are feeling extra powerful and in a position to be beneficent, and if that's the right word, and able to help you, and so that brings some sort of positivity in their life. You can show them a couple of different options that you're considering, and ask them for their advice and their preference about which of those options, so they are feeling that they have control and power over what is going to be submitted and proposed. So we're talking here all about what you do very early stages before even you've finalised your design. And so that's really how I would go about pandering to ego. Just do as best you can to get to know them, and then really appeal to their sense of charity, I suppose, in helping you, and give them as much of a sense of power as you can, whilst at the same time maintaining what it is that you want to achieve out of this as well. It's not always an easy line to balance, but that's kind of where you want to go. So, have you dealt with a planner who has a massive ego, and what did you do to overcome that? Let us know in the comments below. Or if you have any additional questions relating to this kind of thing, let us know in the comments below. That would be really good to hear from you. So, how to avoid objections, and possibly even better, how to gather support. So, if you're in a conservation area, the chances are that there is possibly a local civic society or a local friends of group who might be friends of some particular landmark listed building. Those are the sorts of groups who are most likely to put in an objection. And then other interested parties would be your neighbours, people who live really close to either side of you, to the back of you and in front of you. Those are the people who are most likely to be affected by not only the end result of the finished design, but they're also going to be the most affected by any building work. So those are the people who are most likely to object. So how you can go about avoiding objections is to really early on kind of treat them in a similar way to how you might treat a very big ego planner. But what you want to make sure that if you're living next to some neighbours, you kind of want to get on with them. I mean, you know, if you're slightly sociopathic, maybe you're not bothered about getting on with your neighbours, but I'd say that most people want to get on with their neighbours. So what you'd be best to do is go and have a chat with them, invite them around for a cup of tea and a biscuit or something like that, and have a chat with them, or over the garden gate, garden fence, show them some sketches and have a chat with them about what it is you're trying to do and why you want to do it and how that's going to benefit not only your property but also the value of their property. That's the sort of thing that they're going to be interested in, and how, you know, you're going to be getting good quality builders, and you'll make sure that, you know, that any disturbance for them during construction is minimum, and you want to, you know, make sure that you're in conversation with them about it and that they are on board. And if you can get that sense from them that they are happy and they understand, possibly they would like to do something similar with their own home in the future, in that case, you know, they're much more likely to be supportive of what you're doing. And if you can sense that they are really supportive of what you're doing, then what you could ask them to do would be to write a letter of support, because planners often get letters of objection and don't often get letters of support. And, you know, having supporting letters is a real positive thing, and it can sway things away from the negativity of an objection letter. So that is something that you really rarely get. You rarely get letters of support, but if you can, do it. And you could write your own letter of support and ask them if they would be willing, on their behalf, and then ask them if they would be happy to sign that, and you know, you'd be willing to post it into the planning department yourself on their behalf. Obviously, don't do that without their agreement, but to make it easy for them to support you, you could take that approach and ask them if they'd be happy to do that. So that's one way of gathering support. Another way to avoid objections are people who are can tend to have a bit more influence are those bigger groups, the local civic society, the local friends of a special place group. So you could go along to their meetings and meet the people who are involved and have a chat with those people and see, you know, discuss your proposal with them, understand what if any objections they could possibly have, and see if there are ways that you can overcome that within the design so that they are not going to object because they are happy to support that. Again, if you can get a letter of support from those groups, that would be amazing, and that would really help your case at planning. But those are really the two key groups that are most likely to either object or potentially support you. So, have you discussed your proposals with your neighbours? What did they say? How did you go about it? Let us know in the comments below. I'd be really happy to see what you've got to say about this. So finally, the key thing, this was the tips on anticipating and responding to conservation-centric planners. So conservation area characteristics are going to be a key thing to dealing with this. You really need to understand what your conservation area character is, and it's very easy to find that out. If you go online and just type in the name of your conservation area, and it should be listed within the planning section of your local authority's website, and on there will be description, there will be a map showing you what the boundary is, there will be descriptions of the character, and they will talk about what the architectural styles are, what typical special features are common in that area, the materials that are used, things like anything that's particularly important from a landscape point of view, particular buildings that are special and of particular importance to the character of that area will be in there as well. So all of that information is really, it's going to be key to understanding what kind of things are going to be seen to be acceptable and in keeping, respectful, sensitive to the character of your conservation area. And so you need to be able to discuss that when you're discussing proposals with the planner. You need to be showing them, referring back all the time to what are the conservation area characteristics and how you are respecting those, how you are being sensitive to those, how you are enhancing those with your proposals. That is going to be the way to show your planning officer that this project does deserve to be approved because it does meet their requirements for a conservation area. So have you got a property in a conservation area and you're thinking about doing some work to it? I hope that this has been really interesting and useful for you. Let me know if you've got any particular comments, any specific characteristics for your conservation area that you're struggling to deal with. Be grateful for your comments, put them below. A final sort of tip is, if your initial conversations and discussions with your planning officer don't go well, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to get something close to what you want. It does indicate that it is going to be difficult, it's likely to be costly, and it may not ultimately be successful. So those are sort of risks that you need to balance up in terms of your time, your energy, and any costs associated with taking that through. But initial conversations that don't go well don't necessarily, they may be indicative, but they're not necessarily going to say exactly whether you're going to get approval or not. So you don't have to give up at this point. It is going to be more of a rocky ride to get what you want. So you need to buckle up and be prepared. You know, it has to be important enough for you to pursue it, to carry on if your initial discussions don't go well. But it doesn't automatically mean that it's never going to be possible or nothing is going to be possible. Again, if they don't go well, then it may be the time to bring in a specialist, or at some point in the project before you submit for planning application, it may be worth employing a specialist planning consultant to help you with the preparation of the information that goes into planning to strengthen the case and the argument for your proposal so that it's got a better chance of getting permission. If you don't get permission, that isn't the end of the story. You can go to appeal. So that's always an option, to go to appeal and you know, figure out, you know, argue against any I'm getting my words, if anything that, you know, if a negative result. But what you can also, during the planning process, there is also a lot of scope for negotiation. So that is where it is best to have a planning consultant involved, and they are dealing with that negotiation if it's particularly sensitive and tricky, as a lot of some conservation areas are. It's not always necessary to do that, but there certainly is scope for negotiation. So if you submit an application, you want to submit what you ideally want, but you want to be able to also have a plan B and possibly a plan C that you would also be happy with, so that you can negotiate with the planner and bring it back, rein back your proposal a little bit if needs be as a result of negotiation. That's what's coming out, that you need to make some changes. Well, you can alter proposals and go back to the planners and see, you know, where you would have the potential to get approval. So I hope that's been helpful. It's a bit of a minefield. Planning is always a bit of a minefield, but you know, sometimes it's kind of a bit of a suck it and see. You just have to go for it, and you just don't know. Sometimes it can depend on the individual case officer. It can depend on recent legal court cases, rulings. They can change things overnight. There's all sorts of things that impact on planning and legislation. If you've got contacts in higher places, I have worked on projects where members of the government have been asked to contact the local authority planning department and put pressure on to get projects approved. Now, that's a bit dodgy, I think, but anyway, there are ways and means of getting projects approved, and but ultimately, in a conservation area, what you want from your project is you want to make sure that your project is going to sit well, is going to look good, is going to enhance your neighbourhood, because at the end of the day, that then reflects on the value of your property, and it reflects on, it will impact on your own enjoyment of the space and the place as well. So, you know, the last thing you want to do is make things look bad and look worse than they are, and you know, it's always best to come from it from that point of view, that what you're looking to do is to create a positive impact, not only internally for your own space internally, but also externally for your neighbourhood. So I hope that's helped. If you'd like some more help, if you're considering doing some work on your own home and you haven't done already, then go and download the Design Your Home Vision checklist from my website. I'll put the details in the comments below for you to get that. That will takes you through a couple of stages, key decisions that you need to make to get yourself ready and lay the foundations for you to have a really good project going forwards. And come back again next week when I will be here again for another live Q&A, and I look forward to speaking to you then. Okay, bye for now. Can't press the finish button.